2012 was the first year of serious mobile gaming. Now, there were already serious games on the phone before then, but the introduction of Clash of Clans opened the floodgates for hundreds of thousands of gamers to take mobile gaming serious. Let me start off by saying that this video is not talking about the games that are listed on the top charts of the Play Store or the App Store for 2012. Those lists are too easily manipulated by the aggressive advertising to the young and inexperienced mobile games player base. Rather, this video is going to cover which games stood out as the best games among serious gamers that were released in 2012. The first and best game of 2012 was Clash of Clans, but a lot of people don't realize that Clash of Clans didn't actually get popular in 2012, but rather started to explode among serious gamers in 2013. The reason for this is because even though Clash of Clans was simple in graphics and concept, the game was truly competitive with diverse strategic options, and it was, at the time, mostly fair to free-to-play players. But most importantly, it was the most competitive multiplayer challenge the phone had to offer at that time. And while serious gamers were in no way wanting to switch over to mobile gaming at that time, we all had phones, and the idea of playing a competitive game on the side when we weren't around our preferred gaming system was great, and we had a lot of fun with it. The game experienced even more growth in 2014, but that influx included mostly casual gamers. In fact, by that time, the game was probably already losing a lot of its serious gamers, partially because they were ready to move on to something new, but mainly because updates were making the game increasingly pay to win. Regardless, Clash of Clans had already succeeded in bringing hundreds of thousands of serious gamers to the mobile phone. And while many of them left mobile gaming for years after that experience, it started the transition that we are seeing today. The second game on the list is Kingdom Rush. This game is a strategy tower defense game developed by Iron Games Studio. You might be surprised to see a tower defense game at the top of a serious gaming list, but they were really popular at that time, and you have to keep in mind that mobile gaming back then was supplemental gaming for serious gamers. Unless you had triplets and diapers, mobile games were almost never the first choice for a serious gamer. Because of this, Kingdom Rush was an amazing choice for a supplemental game. The graphics were good for its time, it had a diverse amount of enemy types, and even more options for strategies to defeat them, and you could play the game in offline mode. Most importantly, the game was extremely challenging, which is why it attracted so many serious gamers to play it. The developers even created an in-game encyclopedia for studying enemies so that players could sit there and calculate how they might defeat some of the harder levels. So it was pretty intense, and technically still is, because the game is still available today. The third game was Modern Combat 4 Zero Hour. Made by Gameloft, which was one of the biggest mobile game companies back then, Modern Combat 4 was the forerunner of the shooter games we see all over mobile gaming today. These graphics were unbelievable back then, and while game servers couldn't come close to delivering what we see nowadays, even the multiplayer was amazing for its time. The story of the game was good, but more importantly, the feel of the game was exactly what players were wanting. In fact, when Modern Combat 5 came out 2 years later, it was bulked out because of its inferiority to its predecessor. To make this even more profound, this was released during a time when all of the giants of normal gaming like EA Games and Activision weren't even trying to make mobile versions of their games. So while this game is not much to look at nowadays, it should always be remembered as a forerunner that paved the way for the mobile shooter games we see today. The fourth game on the list is Heroes Call. This RPG was a groundbreaking concept for its time because instead of using on-screen joystick controls, which was typical and arguably still is, it used tap-based controls for everything you needed to do in the game. Now, technology for RPGs have gotten a lot better, and this game doesn't even hold a candle to any of the top 10 games that I have on my list for the RPGs of 2022. But for its time, this was the best that mobile gaming had to offer in the RPG realm. The gameplay was smooth and the loading times were quick. It had a diverse amount of equipment that you could find, and its sense of exploration was excellently done. The fifth game was Waking Mars. This game was incredibly unique for 2012, and honestly, 10 years later, it's still fairly unique. Instead of focusing on the typical shooting aliens or some other kind of warfare, Waking Mars highlights exploration and solving problems. The plot of the game has you as an astronaut who gets trapped underground in a dying Mars. To restore Mars, it becomes your mission to restore the local flora and fauna, of the planet, all while enjoying great graphics and listening to beautiful music. The sixth game on the list is Plague Inc. This game became very popular in 2012 as you created your own disease as you tried to spread it through airports and eventually tried to take over and destroy the whole world. Nowadays, in light of COVID, some might find this insensitive, and while there might have been some of that back then, it was very minimal, and most people just really enjoyed the concept of this fantastically made game. The seventh game on the list is Subway Surfers, but Subway Surfers, like Clash of Clans, didn't really become very popular until 2013. Rather, the game like Subway Surfers that was really popular in 2012 was Temple Run, which that game was made in 2011, so you might see a theme that back then there was usually about a year delay before a game would really take off. Temple Run was attractive because it added a challenge, but it was a simple game that you could pick up when you were at the bus stop or in between classes, and it didn't distract you from life. Because as I mentioned earlier, gaming back then for serious gamers was more of a supplemental game. They still wanted a challenge, but they weren't looking to these games as their number one main game they would play. Subway Surfers took all of the good things about Temple Run and made it even more enticing with better graphics and better gameplay. The eighth game on the list is Hero Academy. This game is a two-player tactical board game where you try to destroy your opponent's crystal before they are able to destroy yours. You will notice that it has a lot of similarities to Clash Royale, and I have no doubt that Supercell was inspired by this concept as they created their more popular game only 4 years later. The game was masterfully set up with a lot of diversity, so I think the only reason that it is not doing as well as Clash Royale is because it has a little bit more of a clunky design, and obviously Supercell has a lot more money for advertising. The ninth game for 2012 was Punch Quest. This game is an arcade-style 2D scroller with a masterful blend of simple game mechanics and a surprisingly diverse array of power-ups. As you watch this footage, you can see that these games age really well. So while there are a lot more 2D scrollers in the mobile market right now, this game could probably hold its own against them. Sadly, after several years, the developers decided to stop supporting the Android version of it, so now it is currently only available on iOS. The last game on the list is Rayman Jungle Run. This game was a PC and console port over to the mobile phone, which may seem normal to us now, but back then that was very rare. Ubisoft was definitely ahead of the curve as they started transferring their games over to the mobile phone. Now, unfortunately, since mobile gaming was still in early development, the game developers weren't able to quite fine-tune the controls to where it was as good as we would expect in a mobile game nowadays, but it was still pretty good, and it was one of the few AAA game ports over to the mobile phone at that time. Okay, so those are the top 10 mobile games for 2012, but I do have 3 more honorable mentions for you. The first one was Candy Crush Saga, which has been historically at the top of the charts, even above Clash of Clans for many, many years. The reason I did not put it on this list is because most of the player base of Candy Crush Saga are casual gamers, but as I've looked into it, apparently a lot of serious gamers have played this game on the side. Of course, not as their main game, but as a supplemental game in which they do take the game serious and they do try to reach those levels, usually without spending money, because if you spend money in Candy Crush Saga, it kind of ruins the challenge of it. But nonetheless, serious gamers playing Candy Crush Saga. So I had to put it on here because it's one of, if not the biggest mobile game of all time, but I didn't put it on the official list because the vast majority of those players are casual gamers. The second honorable mention are iOS only games. 10 years ago, iOS was crushing Android in the area of gaming. They had games like Horn, which was a really good RPG. They kind of felt like it could have been in the Legend of Zelda series. And you can see here that the graphics for a game that was 10 years old on the mobile phone This is pretty good. But the superiority of iOS over Android wasn't just about graphics and what the iOS could handle over Android. It was just a trend among game developers. For example, the game Ziggurat didn't have really good graphics, but it was a really high quality game that was loved by gamers, and the developers just never saw a need to put it on the Android platform. So there were quite a few games like that, but I'm not putting on this list because those of you who have been watching my other top 10 videos know that I only list games that are on both Android and iOS. And then the last honorable mention was Angry Birds, but not the original Angry Birds because that came out a few years earlier, but rather because Angry Birds had become so popular, they were churning out so many new games. In fact, in 2012 alone, they added 3 new Angry Birds games, and all 3 of them were very successful. The reason I don't have them on the list is because each one of them by itself was not special enough to put on the list, so I grouped them together and put them here. Lots of serious gamers played Angry Birds back then because, again, it was supplemental gaming. Because even though they were a little bit more casual in nature, they did offer a challenge, and again, a lot of mobile gaming back then was supplemental game. Well, that's it, guys. Hope that helps. If you feel like there was a game that should have been on here that wasn't, it probably wasn't because I missed it. I've done a lot of research on hundreds of games, and this is what I've come up with. It doesn't mean they are the best, but it does mean that they are the ones that I think are the best. That being said, if you have a different opinion, please put it in a comment below so that others can either upvote it, and if enough people agree with you, it will get liked to the top so that everyone can see your opinion on what game you thought was best in 2012. Alright guys, I'll see you next time.